Okay, so I'm here with Tony Gerber and Jesse Moss, directors of War Game. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So one thing Cinetopia Doc really aims to do is show films that broaden our idea of the documentary genre. And one thing I really loved about your film is that we're able to reflect upon the events of January 6th, 2021 by witnessing this real life simulation of a possible future insurrection. So a hybrid kind of film. And I heard you reference a bit about improv theater, political thriller, but it's unscripted. It's a real cast, real former senator or former governors, U.S. senators. How did you devise this whole idea from the very beginning?
Well, we can't take credit for devising the idea. I think we saw the potential as a documentary and as a film in this war game that was going to be conducted by this organization called Vet Voice. But I love the idea that we could make a documentary that was set in the future. It sounds paradoxical, but that's what it is. And it is this really unusual combination of improv theater and dystopian sci-fi and traditional documentary, and sort of all mixed up and blended together in ways that felt totally fresh to us. And Tony and I made a film about 15 years ago also about a complex war game. And this seemed like a sort of perfect companion piece and very different. And also, as you said, it's a way to process the traumas of January 6, 2021, which we're all wrestling with. What do they mean? And what do they signal about where we're headed? And this war game really struck us as a way to process those feelings and those questions and look forward. There's been a lot of great documentary work about what happened, sort of forensic analyses of that event. And this was something different. So I think we love that idea of leaping into the unknown.
So in terms of casting, I know that this was done by another organization, Vet Voice, but how the caliber of the people are, incredible from 5 different administrations. How did the casting take place?
Well, we were quite fortunate because we had nothing to do with the casting, which is not the way we typically work, right? So, we were the beneficiaries of some extraordinary individuals with real life experience who also happen to have a capacity to dig deep into themselves, right? So I like to think of it in some ways as method acting writ large. These are not trained actors, we've made that point to folks, and people say, well, they're politicians, right? And so politicians are also, accustomed to being around cameras. So what was remarkable for us was that the camera did not throw people off. The Situation Room was covered by 4 shooters, 4 cameras, and they, for all intents and purposes, disappeared. The role players go so deep into the experience and into this imagined scenario that it's terrifyingly real.
Often documentaries take years to make, and the crews can be quite small, sometimes just a camera person or the filmmaker as camera person. But as you said, you had quite a big crew, and I sort of read how much, how many cameras you had, and it all had to happen in a very short amount of time. So tell me a little bit about what it takes to put on something like this, to film and record something like this.
Yeah, it's really an inverse of the traditional way in which I've made documentaries, which is a highly compressed time period and this enormous team of, I think, about 60 people on our crew, about 50 people in the cast. So that's pretty, if you're not used to scripted film production, it's a lot. And also we didn't know, as Tony was talking about the role players, the actors, we didn't really know if they could perform and if the scenario itself would be compelling. Like, it sounded as a concept to be really interesting, but would it, when acted, be something we wanted to watch, or would it feel dreadfully dull? And that was the question we couldn't answer until cameras started rolling, and we'd raised all this money and brought everybody together and built this set. And I think that we discovered immediately how transfixing it was. It did shoot quickly, like really one day of principal photography with this enormous team, but it took about 9 months to actually edit the film, to get to write the film. And documentaries always take a long time and are really written in the edit room. And this one was no different. And figuring out how all these pieces would fit together, and also how to reduce the real-time action over 6 hours to a kind of sculpted 90 minutes or about 70 minutes without the backstories. And there's so much exposition and there's a lot of information coming at you, and there's a lot of characters. And I think we had to kind of find our way through it with our great editing collaborator, Jeff Gilbert. And I wish there were shortcuts to the answers in that process. There never are. And so it was a lot of experimentation.
Yeah. And as you say, and as I heard Tony say as well, it was a gamble, and you have to talk people into, funding this. So I know you have a great deal of experience behind you, but how is it, and how hard is it to sell a film and get it funded like this when you don't know what the outcome is going to be? I mean, documentaries you don't, but sometimes you have a little bit of a clue that this would be dramatic or whatnot.
It was a tremendous challenge. If we weren't facing this presidential election in this moment in time, I don't know that we would have ever gotten it funded. But that was the reason that the war game, the simulation, was staged to begin with. But there was a kind of imperative to get this done. There was a window in which we felt could make it, and so the proverbial expression is the train's leaving the station. So to have that, when you approach investors, can be very helpful. Some investors said, well, we want to know who the cast is, and at some point, I have to tell you anecdotally, Arnold Schwarzenegger was almost the president, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger nearly played the president. And, that might have helped us with, the streamers. It might have helped us with the fundraising. But in essence, we would have had a very different film. Sometimes people ask, well, what did you learn? And I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways is that, as the game was going down and anticipation of it, this idea of the Insurrection Act being invoked, which would then open up the floodgates for all the far-right extremists who've infiltrated active duty military to wreak havoc. As filmmakers, we're like, okay, let's hope that happens, man, because then we'll have action. We'll have a really exciting film. But the reality is that the converse is actually the really exciting film. The film that becomes a rallying cry for reasoned leadership, for process, and for patience, and for listening. We all know that Schwarzenegger would have banged his fist on the table in the first 15 minutes and shut down all the so-called protests, right? So that was quite fascinating.
And as you said, the film had a window to come out. It needed to come out now. It had to be screened, well, before the future insurrection that you've been wargamed, but also ahead of the elections. Was that sort of always in the plan, but also how do you think it's been received a couple months, before people are making their decisions?
It's a curious position to find yourself in, hoping for the irrelevance of your film. And so we say we wish the film were not as relevant as it is, but every day since we shot the movie, it's become more possible, frankly. Just I think in the last couple of days, Trump referred to the use of active duty military or National Guard to police the streets on election day. And there was some immediate pushback. So Trump himself was on the periphery when we shot the film. His name is barely mentioned in the movie, but as we know, he's moved to center stage, and is the nominee and favored in many polls. And so we could be looking at a scenario that mirrors this war game, in that we have a highly contested election in which Harris wins, but Trump contests the outcome. And we see something like what the film presents, or a scenario in which Trump wins and he uses the powers of the Insurrection Act. And so I think that the film is evergreen, actually, regardless of the election outcome. It I think, puts on viewers' minds the question of these executive powers and this kind of unspoken or almost taboo question of what is the relationship between the military and our political leaders. And I think the more we know and understand that relationship and how fraught it can be, particularly when we have somebody who abuses power and shatters norms, I think that the better position we will be to confront those problems when they occur.
Vet Voice, at the end, you have a sort of a line that says that it's providing senior officials with a confidential analysis of the war game. I guess you can't. Did you learn anything from this, or what do you think you got from how the war game designers felt about the simulation and about security of democracy in America.
I think the fact that it happened, that the simulation was staged, and that such top level and deeply experienced individuals gave up their time to participate is encouraging. You know, the film has been called the scariest film of 2024, but it is also a hopeful film, right? Because I think what it does is it reclaims this word patriot in a sense. You know, I think what the takeaway in the end is that democracy is a process. It's not a thing. It's not a place. It's never been so-called great. It's always been in process, and it's still in process. And we have to commit to participating in that process. You know, so that for me was the big takeaway. You know, to Jesse's point about the film being evergreen, you know, to me, it's also about how did we get to this point, right? And it's not just America, it's democracies around the world. You know, you're seeing it in Europe as well, right? This sort of embrace of fascism, you know, and so I think our film does a kind of diegesis on how America broke, you know, and how it can pull itself back together.
Yeah. Are you optimistic or more pessimistic?
I think when you have a leader who's willing to listen to people and the experienced people around him and make what President Hotham, played by Governor Bullock, calls, and I think, an informed decision, I feel more confident in the leadership of our country. So I think understanding that we do have very qualified people in government of both parties and those who are nonpartisan. And I think modeling a kind of healthy politics, which the film does, showing, as Tony said, a kind of process of decision-making by leaders that we think strike us as informed and considered. I think that I find hope in that. And I love to see people who do have different politics, probably disagree on a lot, actually, around a table, not fighting each other, but actually, and, you know, I think respectfully disagreeing. I think that is something that, not to be sort of naive about it, but I think there's, given how corrosive so much of the rhetoric is and how polarized we are, I think there's value there in putting forth a depiction of good government, I think good politics and good leadership.
And I loved Janessa's story too, personally. So I just felt it was like, you know, I felt kind of, it was very relatable and also good for me, optimistic to see someone working so hard and believing and what they do. So, yeah.
If I could add on that topic, you know, Janessa, as you all have just seen the film, you know that she talks about her father going down the QAnon rabbit hole. You know, we've been asked, does this film preach to the choir? Is it a film, you know, for Democrats and for blue states? You know, how is it played in MAGA land, right? And, you know, so Janessa was reluctant to share the film with her dad for months. And we would ask her, have you shown your dad? Have you shown your dad? And she was looking for the right moment to do it. And then finally, I'd say about a month ago, she shared the film with her dad and braced herself for what she thought the reaction would be. And he loved it. And he thought Heidi Heitkamp was fabulous. And so she, from that experience, you know, realized that we make these assumptions about how people of opposing views are going to react to something, whereas maybe we have more in common at the end of the day, right? And I thought that was sort of a wonderful anecdote and encouraging for the possibility of us coming back together.
Yeah, great. I love interviewing co-directors, and I love thinking about, how you divide and conquer something. Obviously, it's a really big project to work on, but I know you work together with Full Battle Rattle, but how did you divide and conquer the responsibilities of a film like this?
Well, it's helped that Tony and I have made a film together. We have a shorthand, I think, a trust in each other and a respect for each other's sort of respective artistic inclinations. And I think we realize we're better, you know, together we can do incredible things. I think we knew that from our past experience. I also co-direct with my wife, Amanda, and I can't imagine really directing on my own at this point in my career. I really love having a partner who pushes me, who challenges me, who I respect, who takes me, you know, Tony has just an incredible vocabulary as a filmmaker that he brought to the table creatively and inspired me. And, you know, I think there's just great trust, and that's what it takes.
Okay.
Yeah, you've noticed how we've responded to your questions, and we haven't stepped on one another once. So, we have a kind of rhythm, and have learned how to support one another and how to be dance partners. Really, Jesse's one of the smartest people I know. I know that if I don't have mental capacity, because as a director, you're making decisions that 100 decisions a minute, and sometimes you get fatigue, you get brain fatigue, and I know that if I need to just take a breath, I know that Jesse's going to handle it, right? And I have 100% confidence that he'll nail it. And so that's beautiful to have that level of trust. I also have a background in live theater, which was really helpful for us on this project, because theater was at once a metaphor, but it was also very real, and there were practical aspects to thinking of this as a theatrical performance. Our production designer came out of the theater, and production designers in the theater tend to think more abstractly than production designers for film, who are functioning in some posited reality, whereas theater doesn't pretend to be real, right? So you're freed in some ways. So thinking of this as a theatrical event, we had the hair and makeup station, right? We brought that in. That wasn't naturally going to happen. We had the countdown clocks. We brought these elements into the film, which allowed us to shape it. We didn't have control of casting. We couldn't say, cut, go back to one, do it again. But we really directed by controlling elements. We designed that table, which has all those beautiful reflections in it. We created that lighting array, which we like to think is sort of a resonant of Dr. Strangelove. And in a lot of ways, that's where you see the hands of the directors.
Great. Does this whole project give you plans to do something like this again, just topically, or just in the conceiving something like this again?
I think we'd love to collaborate again. We'd love to do something that really stretched us, that felt necessary and relevant in the way that this film does. That's a high bar, and it took us 15 years to find a project to collaborate on together after our first film. We'll wait another 15. I hope it's not that long. I think that it's a challenge in documentary to find political stories that are invigorating and fresh and formally inventive, and find new ways to have familiar conversations or new conversations, because we're saturated by political conversation and news, and documentary tends to offer sort of comfortable opinions to people who already know what they think. And I think finding stories opportunities like this, in my experience, and I've had quite a bit of experience in documentary, are actually few and far between. But I hope so. I really do.
Yeah, me too. I call the film a provocation for a conversation, and what we're doing here is we're grateful for the opportunity to pre-record, but it's not quite a conversation. But what I want to say is that one of the wonderful things about the internet is that it is a space for conversation. We have social media accounts, and occasionally people have posted and said, I saw your film in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I thought, and whether it's good or bad, they share something about their experience seeing it. And I love that. So I would encourage your audience to follow us on social media. If they feel like it, add notes in the comments. Tell us what the experience of seeing this film in Edinburgh is. That's really interesting to us. How does this play around the world? So please do that. wargamefilm.com. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook.
Well, Tony and Jesse, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us, and we really appreciate it. So and for the film as well. So
thank you.
Thank you.